Greetings from Kardec Radio, where we are bringing listeners another audiobook, this one entitled, Who is Afraid of Death?, written by Richard Simonetti. This fourth installment covers Chapter 6, entitled, Difficulties in the Return Journey, and Chapter 7, entitled, The Rally from Death. Enjoy. Chapter 6, Difficulties in the Return Journey. The progressive debility of the patient drives him into unconsciousness, which has the effect of a general anesthetic on the spirit which, with very few exceptions, sleeps to die, remaining unaware of the great transition. Level-headed people with a surplus of good deeds overcome the anesthetic of death and can perfectly watch the work being performed by the spiritual technicians. This can cause some constraint, something like a patient watching himself undergoing a delicate surgery. But, on the other hand, this will facilitate their integration to the new spiritual life. Once the disconnecting process is over, they will be totally conscious. The same does not happen to the ordinary man, who sleeps to die and awakes in a state of dizziness, somewhat agitated by the impressions of the material life, especially by those related to the circumstances of his death. Spiritists who are familiar with the manifestations of suffering spirits during mediumistic sessions know this problem well. The communicating spirits are generally not aware of their new situation and complain about the indifference of relatives that do not pay much attention to them. They feel disturbed and afflicted. They were totally unprepared for the return journey and cannot free themselves of the experiences of the material life, feeling like fishes out of water, or to be more precise, like mentally sick people who live in a world of fantasy inside themselves. This troubled state of mind will only be dissipated after some time. The help from spiritual guides and prayers of relatives and friends can accelerate the understanding, but essentially, this will depend on the level of attachment to human fantasies and the capacity to assimilate the new reality. The lack of preparation to face death is a natural thing for thousands of people who return daily to the spiritual world, not having the least idea of what is waiting for them after decades of complete indifference to noble values. They have probably never stopped to consider the meaning of the earth journey, where they come from, why they are here, or what their destiny is. Lacking the compass of faith and the luggage of good deeds, they remain astonished and confused. To this regard, we have to admit that Spiritism is a blessed training course about the realities of life after death. The Spiritist, supported by the extensive and precise instructions received, will be able to land more safely on the invisible continent. He will not have major problems recognizing the new situation, even though that information will not grant him the right to go into more fortunate communities. This will depend on what he did, and not on what he knows. The account balance of death will define whether we have accumulated enough virtues to afford the tickets to higher spheres, and the Spiritist will be requested to pay interest for the knowledge acquired since, according to the law, more will be asked from those who received more. Chapter 7. The Rally from Death. The strongest feeling when we face the death of a dear one is the feeling of loss. My husband cannot die. He is my mainstay. He is my safety. My dear wife, do not leave me alone. I cannot live without you. My son, do not go. You are so young. What will become of me not having you by my side when I grow old? It is amazing how people do not worry about the dying person himself. Even those who accept life after death pray unceasingly, refusing to admit the separation. This kind of behavior goes beyond affection and leads us into the old human selfishness, somewhat like a prisoner that refuses to accept the idea that his cellmate is going to be set free. The exaggeration of grief expressed by despair and non-acceptance creates fluid bonds that weave a retention web where the physical life is artificially sustained. Such vibrations will not prevent death. They will only put it off, making the disincarnating person go through a lot more suffering. It is normal for us, in face of a serious problem that affects a beloved person, to experience feelings of apprehension and anguish. Nevertheless, it is mandatory for us not to let ourselves be led into hatred and despair, which always increase the human problems, especially those related to death. When the family members refuse to accept the separation, thus creating the undesirable vibration web, the spiritual benefactors, through magnetic resources, artificially recover the dying patient. Then, an unexpected recovery occurs, and he regains consciousness and is able to mutter a few words. That treatment is usually effected during the late hours when the family members, exhausted but relieved, decide to take a rest. Thank God, the Lord has listened to our prayers, they proclaim. Taking advantage of the truce, the spiritual benefactors accelerate the disincarnating process and the disconnection begins. Death comes then to escort more passengers into the spiritual world. Few people realize the need to help the disincarnating person during the traumatic transition. That is why this procedure is frequently used by the spiritual guides, sending away those who not only do not help, but make things even worse. There is even a popular saying about the subject. It was the rally from death. They say, he got better to die.